Okay? This morning, June 28th, 2026, CNN is running one story, BBC is running one story. Reuters, AP, every major news outlet in the world, they are all telling you the exact same thing. And the story goes like this. Iran violated the ceasefire. Iran used drones to attack a Panama-flagged oil tanker called the MT Kiku while it was transiting through the Strait of Hormuz. The United States was forced to respond. So CENTCOM, that's U.S. Central Command, launched airstrikes against 10 Iranian military targets in and around the strait. And then Donald Trump went on Truth Social and warned, and I'm quoting him directly here, that there may come a point when America is no longer able to be reasonable and will be forced to militarily complete the job. And if that happens, and again, this is Trump's own words, the Islamic Republic of Iran will no longer exist. Okay? So that's the story the media is giving you. Now, I want to show you something that none of them are talking about. Article 5. Article 5 of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding, the ceasefire agreement that the United States itself signed, it says, and I'm reading the exact text here, the Islamic Republic of Iran will make arrangements using its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days from the Persian Gulf to the Sea of Oman and vice versa. Okay? Let me say that again slowly. Iran will make the arrangements for safe passage. Not America, not the United Nations, not Oman, not some joint committee, Iran. The Islamic Republic of Iran is the entity responsible under this agreement for deciding how ships move through the Strait of Hormuz. Does that make sense, guys? America, with its own signature on its own document, handed Iran the authority to manage the most strategically important waterway on the planet. And now America is bombing Iran because Iran is exercising that authority. This is not Iran violating the agreement. This is America bombing Iran for complying with the agreement. Let that sink in for a moment. Now, 3 weeks ago, and this is important, I said on this channel that the Islamabad deal was not a peace deal. I said it was smoke and mirrors. I said it was a trap. I said the trap would not close on Iran. I said it would close on Washington. And right now, today, June 28, 2026, we are watching that trap spring shut in real time. So what I want to do for the next 20 minutes or so is take you through exactly what is happening underneath the surface of what the media is telling you. And I'm going to add a dimension to this story that almost nobody is connecting properly. And that dimension is Israel. Because the way this story ends, and I want you to really pay attention to this, the way this story ends is not just going to determine what happens to Iran and America. It is going to determine whether Israel's biggest geopolitical dream collapses before it ever gets off the ground. Okay? Let's get into it. All right, guys. To understand what's really happening, you need to understand a mechanism that I call the Article 5 trap. Here's the idea, and it's actually very simple. When a superpower signs an agreement without reading it carefully, or worse, signs it knowing full well what it says, but betting the other side won't dare enforce it, then that piece of paper becomes the most dangerous weapon that can be used against them. Okay? The document becomes the weapon. Now, let me break down what Article 5 actually says, because the details matter enormously here. The text says Iran will make arrangements for safe passage. That phrase, make arrangements, is legal language for Iran is administrative authority. Iran decides the logistics. Iran determines which vessels go through, by which route, and under whose supervision. There's no mention of America having any coordinating role. There's no mention of America having any say in which corridor ships use. The text then says Iran will conduct dialogue with the Sultanate of Oman to define future maritime administration in the Strait. Oman, not America. Oman and Iran together. So when Iran told ships this week that the only authorized transit route was the northern corridor, meaning the corridor inside Iranian territorial waters, Iran was not violating the MOU. Iran was implementing it. And here's where it gets really interesting, guys. Look at the numbers. On Wednesday this week, 70 ships transited the Strait of Hormuz in one day. 70. That's roughly normal. Thursday, after the IRGC warned that ships using unauthorized corridors would be dealt with more forcefully, the number dropped to 54. Saturday, yesterday, it dropped further to 40. From 70 to 40 in 3 days. Okay? That is a 30% drop in global oil transit traffic in 72 hours. And it's not because of military action. It's because Iran published a rule based on Article 5 and ships started following it. Now here is the moment that blew everything up. The United States, through JMAC, the Joint Maritime Information Center, which is a US Navy operation, tried to establish an alternative corridor, a new transit route running along the coast of Oman, in international waters, without coordinating with Iran, without Iran's approval. Iran said, you can't do that. That's our call to make under Article 5. Any ship using that corridor is violating our administrative authority over this strait. And then the MT Kiku, a Panama flag tanker carrying more than 2 million barrels of crude oil, tried to use the American corridor, and an Iranian drone hit it. So the question that every news outlet is framing is, did Iran attack a civilian vessel? And the answer, factually, is yes. But the actual question, the question that determines everything about who is right and who is wrong here, is, did that vessel have the legal right to be in that corridor? And according to the document that America signed, the answer is, that's disputed. And when there's a legal dispute about a treaty, you negotiate. You don't bomb. America bombed. That tells you everything you need to know. Okay, so the obvious next question is, why? Why would the most powerful military in human history sign an agreement that gives Iran authority over the Strait of Hormuz? Like, who in the room said, yes, this is a good deal for us? And the answer to that question, guys, is going to help you understand the entire architecture of this war. When the Islamabad Memorandum was signed, the United States was under enormous pressure, not military pressure. America was winning militarily. It had bombed thousands of Iranian targets. It had established aerial supremacy over the theater. It had degraded Iran's air defense network significantly. The pressure was political and economic, okay? Think about what was happening. The Strait of Hormuz was effectively being choked. Traffic was down. Oil prices were climbing. The global economy was starting to seize up. The Gulf Cooperation Council countries, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, had absorbed more than 1,770 Iranian ballistic missiles and close to 4,000 drones during the course of the conflict. These are American allies, guys. And they were getting pummeled while sitting inside what was supposed to be the American security umbrella. And back in Washington, the political situation was a disaster. The War Powers Resolution had passed the Senate 50-48. Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna was literally threatening to take the president to court. The domestic consensus for continuing the war was cracking. And every day the war continued, more people in America were saying, what exactly are we getting out of this? So when the Islamabad deal landed on the table, there were two factions in the Trump administration. Faction 1 said, sign it, get out, declare it a win, and move on. Faction 2, and this is a part nobody's saying out loud, believed the move was just a temporary pause. That once things calmed down, they would find ways to reinterpret the agreement, reimpose pressure, and eventually get the outcome they wanted without publicly fighting for it. And you can tell Faction 2 was running the show because of what happened immediately after the MO was signed. Three things, okay? First, the USS George H.W. Bush Carrier Strike Group was still being deployed to the Middle East. If you've signed a genuine peace deal, why are you sending more warships? Second, America brokered a completely separate three-party framework agreement with Israel and Lebanon, and this framework allows Israeli forces to maintain a security buffer zone in southern Lebanon until Hezbollah is fully disarmed. Iran and Hezbollah immediately said, wait, the MO says all hostilities on all fronts, including Lebanon, are supposed to stop. What is this? Third, and most importantly, America tried to create its own shipping corridor through the strait without getting Iran's sign-off. Now, if you put those three things together, a very clear picture emerges. America signed a document that it had no intention of fully honoring, hoping that the combination of military pressure and diplomatic maneuvering would let it get the practical outcome, open strait, diminished Iran, without having to concede the legal authority, Article 5 transferred to Tehran. Iran figured this out. Iran's response was exactly what you would expect from a party that has a stronger legal position, but a weaker military position. They started enforcing Article 5 aggressively. knowing that every time America pushes back against that enforcement, America is the one that looks like it's breaking the deal. This is not chess. This is judo. Iran used America's own signature as a weapon. Okay? Now, I always do this in my analysis, and I'm going to do it here too. I want to give you the strongest possible version of America's argument, because I never want you to just take my word for things. The strongest American argument is this. Article 5 says Iran will ensure safe passage. That is a commitment Iran made, an obligation. When Iranian drones attacked the Imtikiku, a civilian commercial vessel carrying oil, Iran violated that commitment regardless of which corridor the ship was using. The language says safe passage. A ship getting hit by a drone is the opposite of safe passage. So the United States was entirely justified in retaliating because Iran broke its own promise first. Now, this argument is actually pretty good legally. It's not stupid. In international law, when one party materially breaches a treaty, it gives the other party grounds to respond. And there's historical precedent for using coercive pressure to enforce compliance. I will acknowledge that. This argument has real weight to it. But here's what the American steelman cannot explain. If America genuinely wanted Iran to fulfill its Article 5 obligation of ensuring safe passage, then why did America unilaterally create a transit corridor without Iran's agreement? Think about the logic here. If I sign a contract that says you are responsible for managing the delivery route and I want you to manage it properly, then I need to work with you on the route. I cannot go set up a completely different delivery route on my own and then get angry when you don't recognize it. That's exactly what America did. The JMIC, again, a US Navy operation, announced an expanded corridor near the Omani coast without going through the Article 5 process, which requires Iran to make the arrangements and Iran to coordinate with Oman about future administration. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, said it clearly in Baghdad today, and I'm going to quote him directly. The Strait of Hormuz remains under the total oversight and management of Iran through the coming 30 days. Any intervention or any unilateral action will result in exacerbating the situation and delaying the reopening of the strait. So let me put the paradox in the simplest possible terms. America attacked Iran because a ship got hit while using a corridor America created. Iran says that corridor was not authorized because Iran, under Article 5, is the only party allowed to create corridors. Article 5 was signed by America. This is not a dispute about whether Iran attacked a ship. This is a dispute about interpretive authority over a treaty. And when you have an interpretive dispute about a treaty, the correct response under every framework of international law is negotiation and dialogue. J.D. Vance said it himself. He said if Iran has concerns about the Mo, they should pick up the phone. But then America bombed Iran before Iran could pick up any phone. You can't bomb someone and then tell them to call you. This is not a conflict about international law. This is about something much deeper. And that brings me to the part of this analysis that I think is most important and the part that almost no one in the mainstream media is willing to say directly. All right, guys, here's the question I want to sit with for a few minutes, because I think it is the most important question of this entire situation. If America knows, or at least if the lawyers in the room know, that Article 5 creates real legal ambiguity here, if they know that bombing Iran might actually be making America look like the party in breach of the agreement, if they know the world is watching and a lot of people are going to say America is the aggressor here, then why can't they stop? And I want to give you two answers to that question. Two frameworks to help explain something that from the outside looks completely irrational. I call these two frameworks together the ontological spiral. Let me explain what that means. There's a concept in international relations theory called ontological security. And the idea is this: nations don't just seek physical safety. Nations don't just want their territory to be intact and their people to be alive. Nations also need something deeper. They need their sense of who they are, their identity narrative, to remain stable and coherent. Now, for the United States of America, that identity narrative has been consistent for more than 70 years. And the narrative goes like this: we are the guarantors of the global order. We are the force that keeps international trade flowing. We are the power that ensures freedom of navigation. When goods move around the world safely, when oil gets from the Gulf to Asia, that's because we are here. The Strait of Hormuz is the centerpiece of that narrative. 20% of the world's oil supply goes through that strait. If Iran, the country that America has called a rogue state for 45 years, is the entity deciding which ships go through and which routes they use, then America's entire identity narrative collapses. Not because America loses oil, America doesn't even import much Gulf oil anymore, but because the story America has told about itself, the story of the indispensable nation, the benevolent hegemon, the necessary superpower, that story requires America to be in control of the Strait of Hormuz, or at minimum, it requires that no one else is in control. When Iran started enforcing Article 5, Iran didn't just challenge American military power, Iran challenged American identity. And when identity is threatened, when the narrative that a nation uses to explain its own existence is under attack, nations do not respond rationally. Nations respond emotionally. And specifically, they respond with anger. Anger does not ask, is this response proportionate? Anger does not ask, is this legally defensible? Anger asks one question and one question only. How do I reassert who I am right now, immediately? And the answer to that question for the United States of America is always the same. Has been the same since 1945. You strike. You demonstrate force. You show the world that the narrative is still intact. That's why CENTCOM bombed 10 Iranian targets within hours of the MT Kiku incident. Not because that was the optimal strategic response, but because it was the only move that let America say to the world, we're still in control here. The story is still valid. But here is the tragedy of this, and this is the part that breaks my heart a little bit, okay? Because I've studied empires for a long time. Every time America strikes under these conditions, every time it lashes out not from strategy, but from wounded identity, it doesn't restore the narrative. It patches a tear in a story that is already fundamentally unraveling, and Iran understands this. That's why their drones keep flying. Because every American strike is evidence that Iran has successfully gone inside America's psychological architecture. Now let me add the second framework, because the ontological security piece explains why America acts emotionally. But it doesn't fully explain why America structurally cannot stop, even when calmer heads are in the room. For that, you need a concept called escalation of commitment. Some of you might know this as the sunk cost fallacy. Here's the idea. When you have invested enormous resources into a decision, money, time, reputation, you become psychologically incapable of admitting that the decision was wrong. Because if you admit it was wrong, then everything you spent trying to make it right becomes worthless. And that is an intolerable psychological position. Look at what America has already spent on this war. Tens of billions of dollars in military operations, significant degradation of its strategic weapons stockpiles, its reputation with Gulf allies who watched American bases fail to protect them while absorbing nearly 4,000 Iranian drone strikes, its credibility with its own Congress, which passed a war powers resolution to force Trump to stop, its reputation in the global press, where outlets from Foreign Policy to The Atlantic to The Independent all published pieces saying America effectively lost this war. And then there are the memes, guys. I know we're supposed to be serious analysts here, but the memes matter politically. Taco, Trump always chickens out. Nacho, not a chance Hormuz opens. These are not just jokes. These became political shorthand for the idea that the most powerful military in history couldn't open a strait that is 33 kilometers wide. Some people can swim 33 kilometers, okay? And the American military couldn't open it. Now, imagine you are Donald Trump. Imagine you are sitting in the White House on June 28, 2026, and someone tells you, Mr. President, to honor the mode correctly, we need to acknowledge that Iran has Article 5 authority over the corridor. We need to coordinate with Tehran on the transit routes. What that effectively means is everything we did in this war, every bomb, every aircraft carrier, every threat, every sacrifice was for nothing. Because Iran still controls the strait. Because the agreement we signed gives them that control. There's not a politician in America, and certainly not Donald Trump, who can accept that conclusion publicly. Because accepting it means the whole enterprise was a mistake. And the bigger the sunk cost, the more emotionally and politically impossible it becomes to walk away from the mistake. So instead of stopping, you escalate. Every new airstrike is a psychological attempt to justify the previous airstrikes. Every new threat is an attempt to make the whole narrative coherent again. And every escalation creates new sunk costs, which makes the next de-escalation even harder. This is the ontological spiral. Wounded identity produces anger. Anger produces escalation. Escalation produces sunk costs. Sunk costs make stopping psychologically unbearable. Stopping becomes more frightening than continuing. And so the escalation continues, an identity wound deepens, and the spiral tightens. America is not bombing Iran because it has a good strategy for winning. America is bombing Iran because stopping feels worse than going on. And I want you to really understand this, guys, because this is not a criticism unique to America. This is a pattern that empires have followed throughout all of human history. The Roman Republic did it. The Ottoman Empire did it. The British Empire did it. You get into a conflict where your identity is on the line, and you cannot stop even when every rational calculation says you should. The spiral takes over. The only question is how long before the spiral exhausts itself, okay? Now I want to add a layer to this analysis that I think makes everything much more significant. And this is a layer that almost no major news outlet is connecting properly to the rest of the story. While America and Iran are locked in this drone and airstrike back and forth over the meaning of Article 5, while the ontological spiral is doing its work on Washington, there's a country sitting outside the room watching and experiencing something that I can only describe as a slow motion realization of betrayal. That country is Israel. Let me give you some numbers here, because the numbers are extraordinary. A recent poll in Israel found that 92.1% of Israelis, and this includes Jewish and Arab Israelis, agree that Iran was the main beneficiary of the Islamabad MOU. 92%, that is not a controversial position in Israel. That is a national consensus. 86% of Israelis have a negative view of the agreement itself. These are America's closest allies in the region. These are the people whose military flew alongside American B-2 bombers for months. These are the people who Pete Hegseth, the US Secretary of War, called a steadfast partner with unmatched skill in battle back in March. And 86% of them think the agreement that ended the war their American partner dragged them into is a disaster. Now here's what happened between March and June that explains how we got here. Iran did not collapse. Okay? That's the starting point for everything. The plan, and there was a plan, even if it was never formally announced, the plan was that a combination of American air power and Israeli intelligence would degrade the Iranian regime to the point of either collapse or total capitulation. And then Israel would be the dominant regional power with no serious adversary left standing. I've talked about this before. Some people call it the Greater Israel Project. I call it Pax Judaica. The idea that Israel becomes the organizing center of a new Middle Eastern order. But Iran did not collapse. Iran took extraordinary damage, yes. Iran lost its air defense networks, much of its conventional military infrastructure. Its supreme leader died in an airstrike in February, but the Islamic Republic did not fall. The URGC did not surrender. The Mosaic Defense, the decentralized military structure where every province operates its own cells independently, that held. And so America needed a deal. And to get that deal, America needed to give Iran something meaningful. And what Iran wanted, what Iran had been fighting for, was authority over the Strait of Hormuz. So that's what Article 5 gave them. And here's the thing, guys. To get that deal, America sat down with Iran in Islamabad. And at that table, there were representatives from the United States. There were representatives from Iran. There were representatives from Qatar. There were representatives from Pakistan. Israel had no seat at the table. Not one. Zero. The very country that had fought this war as America's frontline partner, the country that had absorbed the political and diplomatic costs of being seen as the instigator of the conflict, was excluded from the negotiations that determined the outcome. And to make it worse, Qatar, which Israel views as a sympathizer of Hamas, was a key mediator. Pakistan, which has no diplomatic relations with Israel, was the host country. These are the parties that shaped the final text. Israel's ambassador to Washington said it directly. He said he needed clarity about American policy. He said the premise of the Israeli-Lebanese talks that were happening in Washington was that Iran is not involved, but now there's a deconfliction mechanism that explicitly includes Iran. And he said Iran's role is not to restrain Hezbollah. Iran's role is to get out of Lebanon. He was saying, I don't know what deal you just made, and I don't think it's what we agreed to. That is diplomatic language for we were betrayed. And then J.D. Vance, The Vice President of the United States responded to Israeli criticism of the Mo by saying Israel needs to wake up and smell the reality of the situation that country is in. Let that sit for a second. The Vice President of the United States told America's closest Middle Eastern ally to wake up and smell the reality. That is not the language of an alliance. That is the language of a patron who has decided he doesn't need the client anymore. Okay? And this is where I want to zoom out, because I think what we're watching here is something much larger than a fight about a shipping corridor or even the terms of a ceasefire agreement. For decades, and I've talked about this in previous lectures, there has been a strategic vision operating underneath the surface of American Middle Eastern policy. The vision roughly goes like this: systematically dismantle the regional powers that could challenge Israeli dominance. Iraq, done. Libya, done. Syria, done. And finally, Iran, the last serious challenger standing. If Iran is broken, Israel becomes the undisputed regional hegemon, the anchor of a new Middle Eastern order underwritten by American military power, American intelligence, and Israeli operational capability. That's what Pax Judaica looks like in practice. But here's what's happening right now. Iran is not broken. America signed an agreement that hands Iran authority over Hormuz. America excluded Israel from the negotiations that shaped the terms of the peace. J.D. Vance is telling Israel to wake up. And 92% of Israelis believe the war ended with Iran winning. The alliance that was supposed to produce Pax Judaica is visibly fracturing. Not because anyone fundamentally changed their intentions, but because America and Israel have arrived at a point in this war where their interests diverge sharply. Israel needs Iran defeated completely, not paused, not managed, defeated. America needs to get out before the domestic political cost becomes unmanageable. You cannot have both of those things. When you can't have both, you make a choice. And America has made its choice. It chose itself, and the question that will define the next decade of Middle Eastern politics is whether Israel can sustain its strategic position without the full and unambiguous backing of the United States. Because the framework agreement on Lebanon, whatever Netanyahu calls it publicly, does not replace what was lost when Israel was excluded from Islamabad. The Pax Judaica project cannot proceed if the American partner is negotiating the terms of Iranian power behind Israel's back. This is not just a diplomatic disappointment. This is a structural fracture in the most consequential alliance of the 21st century. Alright guys, let me put all of this together. Article 5 of the Mo gives Iran administrative authority over the Strait of Hormuz. America signed that. America then tried to create an alternate corridor without Iran's approval. Iran enforced Article 5 and struck the MT Kiku as a warning. America bombed 10 Iranian targets in response, but America cannot stop, not because it has a strategy for winning, but because the ontological spiral has taken over. Its identity as the global order guarantor is under threat. Its sunk costs are enormous. Stopping feels more dangerous to its political survival than continuing. In 3 days, Hormuz traffic dropped from 70 ships to 40. The global economy is absorbing the shock of every tit-for-tat exchange. The IRGC has struck American bases in Kuwait and Bahrain. Trump is threatening total annihilation. Iran is threatening to halt all negotiations. And while all of this is happening, Israel, the partner that was supposed to be the ultimate beneficiary of this war, has watched 92% of its citizens conclude that Iran won. Watched its ambassador in Washington say he needs clarity about what America just agreed to. Watched J.D. Vance tell them to wake up and smell reality. The ceasefire is not holding. We all know that. The real question is this: when both Pax Americana and Pax Judaica are simultaneously under strain, when the old order is collapsing and the new order hasn't taken shape yet, who is building the architecture of what comes next? Okay, here's what I want you to watch specifically in the next 2 to 3 days. First, watch which corridor the next ship is using when Iran attacks it, if there's another attack. If Iran strikes a vessel using America's Oman corridor, that's Iran continuing to enforce Article 5 authority. That tells you Iran is confident in its legal position and is doubling down. If Iran strikes a vessel using Iran's own authorized northern route, that's a completely different signal. That means Iran is actually escalating beyond the MOL framework, and the situation is far more dangerous. Second, watch Israel. Specifically, watch whether Israel uses the Lebanon Framework Agreement to launch new strikes in southern Lebanon, while the US-Iran MO is still supposedly in effect. Netanyahu has already publicly said the framework gives Israel the right to stay in Lebanon indefinitely until Hezbollah disarms. If Israel acts on that interpretation aggressively, especially in ways that Iran says violate the MO's Lebanon clauses, then the entire structure of the ceasefire collapses. And more importantly, it will tell you that Israel has decided to act independently of American diplomatic coordination, that the Pax Judaica strategy is now being pursued without American cover. Third, watch what happens with the Gulf states, specifically Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar. These countries have been running their own parallel diplomatic track with Iran throughout this conflict. They are terrified of being caught between a collapsing American security umbrella and a resurgent Iran that just demonstrated it can strike their desalination plants, their oil fields, and their airports at will. If any of these countries makes a significant move toward a bilateral arrangement with Iran, a non-aggression framework, a maritime agreement, that will be the signal that the American-led Gulf security architecture is finished. Okay, guys? I always do this. I don't want you to just take my word for any of this. Read the actual text of Article 5 of the Islamabad Memorandum. You can find it on Al Jazeera, Reuters, and the Qatari Foreign Ministry's website. Read it yourself and ask, does Article 5 give Iran administrative authority over the strait? Or does it simply impose an obligation on Iran to ensure safety? Where does the language support each interpretation? Then read the IRGC statement from this morning, where they describe Article 5 as authorizing Iran's control over shipping arrangements. Then read the American CENTCOM statement, where they describe their strikes as enforcement of ceasefire compliance. Put those two statements next to the actual Article 5 text. And then I want you to come back and tell me which interpretation of Article 5 has stronger textual support. Because that question, not who has the bigger bombs, is the question that will determine whether this ceasefire survives. Push back on me if you think I've missed something. That's how we get closer to understanding the world as it actually is. When America is bombing Iran for enforcing an authority that America's own signature transferred to Tehran, and when Israel, the ally that fought alongside America for months, is now being told by the American vice president to wake up and smell reality, while 92% of its population believes the enemy won, the question is not who is going to win the battle for the Strait of Hormuz. The numbers on that strait are telling us something very specific. 70 ships, then 54, then 40. The countdown is already underway. The real question is this: if Pax Americana required America to be the guarantor of global order, and America just signed that authority away in a document, and if Pax Judaica required American power as its underwriter, and America just negotiated a peace deal that excluded its most important Middle Eastern ally, then what exactly is being built in the space that's opening up? And who gets to write the rules of the new world? I don't have the answer to that. But I'll tell you one thing. The 40 ships still moving through that strait today, they're not just carrying oil. They're carrying the last remnants of the old order. And every day that number drops, the new order gets one step closer. I'll see you in the next one.